first thing we'll start with, as usual, is homework. Anybody been somewhere or seen something that they want to mention?
I will mention that in Australia, they have roundabouts at almost every intersection, and it's so nice. They really work well. And my son just cannot stomach the red light anymore. But anyway, if we ever get to that point, we can consider roundabouts. That's all.
I've seen good roundabouts and bad roundabouts, so I'm glad in Australia they've got them all figured out. That's important. Um, one thing that I've been able to notice is I'm up working with some of our banks up what we call our north region, every kind of thing kind of north of I-20. So actually, in the last day or two, I've been in downtown Farmersville, downtown McKinney, and downtown Louisville. Each of those three communities have downtowns similar to Nacogdoches, and each of those three communities are kind of at a different stage in their development of their downtowns. In Farmersville, they're kind of having, like us, kind of a invigoration of downtown, and it's I would say that just a quick glance that Nacogdoches is a little bit ahead of them. In Louisville, their downtown completely died, and over about the last 10 years or so, the city actually had moved from downtown, the city offices, and they've come back in, and they actually took our building. We had to build a new one, and they've purposely put in new infrastructure, parks, et cetera, like that. And now they have kind of the infrastructure there, and the people are really starting to revitalize downtown. And then, of course, McKinney kind of has been through that, done that already, been doing it for a while. And man, it doesn't matter what time you go down there, 2 in the afternoon or 10 o'clock at night, it's hard to find a parking place, and it's a very vibrant area. So it's kind of been neat just to get, in a short amount of time, about a week, a glance at 3 different communities that probably have some of the same goals as we do for our downtown. And they're in 3 different stages of the process that we're kind of in the middle of. So it's kind of neat to see that, kind of a bonus. So anybody else got anything? Well, in that case, we're going to kind of click along. And I think first up is the discussion of the survey number 4, of which I did go and complete today. It was kind of interesting. And Jessica, I'll call on you at that point in time.
Thank you, Miles. So I know y'all have seen our first 3 surveys that we did. That was kind of the community visioning survey. We did our downtown survey, and then transportation and mobility. So this one focuses mainly on housing and economics. This is the one that y'all reviewed 2 weeks ago or so, and gave some feedback. There was some feedback that this survey, the topics were a little bit more specific, a little bit more difficult, which they are. A lot of that is because now that DTJ is starting to write the drafts of our downtown plan and comp plan, they're needing a little bit more specific feedback on, okay, we've gathered these big ideas on housing. What does that actually look like in more detail? So the surveys from here on out, which I think there's 1, possibly 2 more, are going to be much more specific and detailed. And that's just kind of the nature of it. We know that they're not probably catered to as broad of an audience, but at the same time, this is the type of feedback that DTJ needs to be able to make actual concrete recommendations for us. Because, you know, we want to dream big on these plans, but we also want some actionable items too. So that's why we kind of had those big visioning surveys up front, and now they're much more specific. So the housing and economic survey actually launched today. We had it go live about 10 a.m. You can see our social media graphics that went up today, and we have them in English and in Spanish. The survey is also in English and in Spanish. And so those were posted today on our Facebook page, our Nextdoor app, Instagram. There is an ad that should be coming out in the paper either today or Sunday. I'm not sure which one they had space for. But so we'll have an ad in the paper. We've sent this over to KTRE, La Lingua, around the town, and a few other media outlets, so that way everybody knows about it. Our plan is to start the survey today and run it through about February 22nd. Of course, if we only have, 5 people take it, then we'll do more promotion, we'll extend the time. But right now we have about a 2.5-week window. We're planning on leaving it open. So we have that. Yeah.
On the surveys we've done, has the participation stayed level or decreased?
They've decreased a little bit, but the numbers aren't wildly different. Of course, the overall visioning survey, that first one, had the biggest participation, and I think a lot of that was just that it's kind of the big broad topics, it appeals to everybody, and it was the first one out of the gate. Downtown and the transportation survey were all pretty close. So those are pretty close, but they've kind of dropped off a little bit, but not significantly. Also, on that note, Betty, I'm actually glad you brought that up. I think I've mentioned this to y'all before, but just a refresh, in case you are interested in seeing the feedback from those surveys, we have all of that listed on the NAC Taylor website. You can go under resources, click on that tab, and it actually has an Excel sheet of every single answer that was submitted on any of the 3 surveys we've done. They are huge. Yeah.
Does that include, like, I know Betty, did you facilitate surveys? Does that include the out-of-the-box surveys and the group surveys too?
So the meeting in a box, that feedback is all in that engagement report, and it was the draft version that y'all were sent when we gave it to council. So I think they had 3 of the meeting in a box that were fully collated in there. So the stuff that's on the website right now is just the 3 surveys that were all online. We did also add in, there was a few people that printed out surveys and took them to some focus, or not to focus groups, like to their lunch clubs or women's meetings, things like that. So if the survey was printed and brought back to us, we entered that, and that's in there as well. But the meeting in a box is in that draft engagement report.
And it's in a separate report?
Yes, it's in that draft engagement report, and I can send that back out to y'all if you'd like to look at it. It's another, I think I may have some printed copies, but if not, I can print those and get them to y'all.
So will that be updated with the rest of the meetings? If
Yes.
You said that was only 3?
That was about 3, because this was
It was
2 months ago, 3 months ago when we presented to council. So yes, I can get an updated version for y'all. And that draft engagement report as of 2 or 3 months ago is on the website as well. So we do have that, but I can get the updated one. And of course, that engagement report is going to be fully finished out and be one of the appendixes in this. So people will be able to see how we got all our recommendations is by all this engagement. And I think that's at least a 90 to 100 page additional thing on the end of this report. So that will be up. So this is up. So, if y'all have Facebook, please share it. If you want to email this link out to all your friends, we will send this in an email to y'all as far as the graphic, where to go for this survey. And then if y'all just want to forward that on to your contacts, that would be very, very helpful. So that's all we had on the survey. So we'll go to our next one, which is discuss goals and recommendations document. So I know y'all remember from our last meeting, with just us and with DTJ, we went over the goals and recommendations document, which essentially had this little pie graphic in it. So we went over the topics that we decided were most pertinent to downtown, kind of really factored into our plan. Went over that. I sent all of your feedback over to DTJ. We don't have an updated draft of that yet, because at the last CPAC meeting, they actually went over this document at 3 different meetings. There was a lot of questions, concerns about the goals, rewriting of some of the recommendations, and so they had a lot of edits to go into this. So I've sent y'all stuff along, but then with all their edits, DTJ hasn't had time to collate all that together, make those edits, and send it back to us. But just a reminder, this chart and all of these items won't necessarily appear in the downtown plan. This is more something that's embedded in the comp plan, but we wanted to make sure the goals that influence downtown were correct. And from what I believe I heard from y'all, the majority of the goals were correct. We just needed to wordsmith some, add a few words in there, and that's all been sent to DTJ. So once they make all those edits, and they finish the goals, recommendations, and then the strategies, once they get that done, I'll send that back to y'all to look at. There was also some questions at the CPAC on whether the goals were right, if we need to add more of the guiding principles. There was a few big topics that the CPAC thought were left out. And so DTJ is going back and seeing what other guiding principles we need to add to that. So we may have some new pie pieces, for lack of a better word, or new sections added to it. But once that is added, I will send to y'all to look at. And if y'all decide that we need to talk about it and discuss it as a group again, we absolutely can. I know there's some concern that this is more of a comp plan document and not a downtown document, so I wanted to move us forward looking at the downtown stuff, and we can come back to this one when CPAC and DTJ are ready for us to look at that again. Is there any questions about that one? Okay. I'm gonna try to keep this meeting short and sweet. So, the fun thing for today that I'm very excited about, in front of you, you have your spiral bound downtown master plan draft. Let me emphasize, it is a draft. So please, yeah, so we put draft all over it. I've got notes to go over, but this is a draft. DTJ and our city staff heard your feedback as far as getting this draft in March, and then y'all tentatively approving it in April was too fast. So absolutely, so DTJ moved up their timeline, which is why there is a few things missing out of this. It's not that they didn't hear us, it's just we haven't had time to write all that content in here, so please keep that in mind. This is your copy of the draft. Copy Center NAC, thank goodness, came through for me today when I emailed this to them this morning to print, and they did it, and I think I almost killed them, but they got it done. So this is your copy. You can make edits on here, because we are gonna make some edits to this, get your feedback. If you'd like to make edits on here and bring it back to me with your name on it, well, of course, we'll return it. If you wanna make edits on here and then have us put all the information together in one document, or if you wanna start your own Word document, notes, whatever, and then send that to us, either way is totally fine, but Tori and I will be going through and getting all of your feedback and sending it all at once. But there are a few things I wanted to point out, because I know I emailed this to y'all late yesterday, so if you even saw the email, I know you did not have time probably to read 191 pages. I read it all yesterday for the second time, and it took a while. So I wanted to go through a few things with y'all just before you get too far into reading this. So this is what it looks like in color. I've already emailed Keith and told him I hated the color. So, I mean, y'all can have your opinion on that too, but my thought was to put the cover in green, since we're doing the neck together, and some gradient of that. I just think it's a very harsh yellow, but that I don't think really matters in the grand scheme of things, probably.
It's a draft.
Yeah, it's a draft. So yeah, it'll have the front. Of course, we have a lot of these areas here where it says placeholder image, draft across it. So there are some things missing out of this. You'll notice when you go through, there are no maps. The graphics aren't there. We have a section that calls for like future quotes. The whole executive summary is blank. And then there is a big fiscal analysis section that's gonna go in here that is not here yet. And so a lot of that's just because we moved up DTJ's timeline by a month. So they kind of said, you know, we have a lot of these maps, but they're still kind of our working copy because, you know, our housing survey may change some of those things. So those will come. Same thing with the quotes. A lot of those are pulled from places like Strong Towns, whether it's like Best Advice, or they'll be pulled out of our interviews we've done, or focus groups where people are commenting about this is what I want for the future in Nacogdoches. We'll put a quote from Miles about a gateway somewhere in here. We're gonna do it so I can make him happy. So we'll add those things as we go along, and when we have our final draft version that we're gonna get public feedback, it'll look complete with us having the understanding the public's gonna have some edits. Y'all may still have a few edits, but we will have a very polished looking final draft to show to the public. So I wanted to go a few things. So this is kind of some of the stuff you'll see, for example, like over blank percent of this many people responded saying XYZ. We know the majority of people responded recommending certain things about tourism, but it's just going back and actually calculating what the actual percent is. So you'll see stuff like that. We reference appendix numbers or letters that of course aren't there yet because they'll be renumbered. We have a few things in here that say like need a better definition, because we have very technical industry terms in here that we don't think the majority of people who don't have degrees in urban planning are gonna know what we're talking about, so we wanna better define it to make sure this is a usable document for everybody. And then there's some sections that are just plain old blank where it says add content here. And so some of those are still being developed, or some of those are just not wordsmithed enough even for me to look at yet, because we know when you start writing a draft of anything, it looks a little rough. And then also, of course, image of diversity here, graphic here, or drawing here. So you'll see that as you go through. Also, if there's any spelling mistakes, please forgive DTJ. I've circled the name Bonita Creek in here about 14 times because it's with an O. Lanana sometimes is La space Nana, which I can't blame them because some of our street signs say that. So some of that stuff we will get in copy editing, so please forgive them of that. So we have those in here. This is what your table of contents will look like. Y'all got to see a very rough draft of this early on, but essentially we section up this whole plan into executive summary, which is going to have a big broad overview. If people do not want to read 191 pages, we will tell them in about 5 what this plan says. I'll have a few graphics in there, a few images, but we'll have that executive summary, our acknowledgements where all of you guys will be listed in there along with city staff, who our consultants are. We have an introduction that covers kind of the purpose, our vision statement, some things that were pulled out of the comprehensive plan from 2003. We'll talk about land use, character, and built form, mobility and access, arts and culture, opportunity areas, and then implementation, which I think is probably one of the most important things, as I know early on people said, this is great, but if it sits on a shelf and we have no way to do these things, what's the point? So we will have pretty specific implementation strategies in here, and then the appendix is gonna have all that, like the community engagement process. So we'll have that whole engagement document in there. I don't know if we're gonna list every single answer from all the surveys. We will have those up on the website indefinitely. But if we print that and add it, it's gonna be a 1,000 page document at some point. But we will have that appendix, and then there's also gonna be at least some sort of virtual component to this, to where if we can't list every survey response in here, we will have that linked somewhere on our website. So people can still go and see how we got all this information. Any questions so far? All right. So I wanted to show y'all on these next few slides a few of the things that y'all have talked about that we already got in this plan, which I was pretty excited about. A lot of this section on housing, we talk about creating housing opportunities for people to essentially age in place, or have different types of housing structures and housing options to where, you know, you could have a college student living next to a senior citizen, any of that sort of thing. So that way you can age in your same neighborhood, and there are multiple housing options. Mario, I know you've brought that up before, and I think you've brought that up before. So I kind of wanted to show y'all a few spaces where, like, DTJ heard you, it's already in here, which is awesome.
What pages does that?
This one is 68 and 69. And I kind of skip around in here because I didn't want to put 191 slides because I thought y'all would hurt me. So we have that in here. Also, it's listed that buildings that have potential for historic designation and preservation should be identified and preserved in these existing neighborhoods, or possibly the creation excuse me, of new historic districts is mentioned throughout the housing section, which I think is great. And it also talks about soft density infill, which I think is going to be really great. Hi, Laura. But I think some of that soft density infill is going to be very palatable for a lot of people, because some of that infill development is a lot easier on our city infrastructure. But at the same time, a lot of people think, you know, that high density infill, they don't want a huge apartment complex next to a historic building downtown. So maybe some of those softer things where it's like, it's just a townhome or a 2-story duplex, something a little bit easier to stomach.
And is there zoning that can make that happen? How do you?
Yes. You led me right to my next slide, Ann. So this one we talk about, because we had, as a staff, and then from this committee, and then in some of our focus groups, people kind of said we need some sort of transition where it's downtown, which is for Nacogdoches is urban. So we have downtown and it butts up to other historic districts, and there's this weird little in-between space. So we talked about needing a transitional area or something that where we can use kind of form-based code to make sure that if we do have new buildings, it fits either in downtown or in these transition districts. So one of the things they talk about is this downtown mixed use designation and kind of a use category. So that's a lot of, you know, promoting mixed use, but also when you have the housing in there with it, it's not huge apartment complexes. It's, you know, 2 or 3 4plexes in a row, and then a coffee shop, or then a park, or, you know, some sort of public land.
Could you discuss form-based zoning? You mentioned that.
Did you want to discuss it?
Or would you just like to say what that, how interpret that?
Yeah, so a lot of form-based is looking more at how the building fits with the other designs around it. And so it's a lot more specific. It's a lot more, I don't want to say case by case, but it's pretty close to a case by case. But like this area, this form of building would fit better as far as setback.
It's not whether or not you're a business or a residential thing, but how you fit in.
Exactly,
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're gonna, because even some of our chapters and some of our housing stuff is then going to reference back to the comp plan. And so if we talk about form-based housing here, it's also gonna have a reference to go to the comp plan document, this section, and they kind of explain what form-based code may look like in Nacogdoches. Oh, Brian's got his hand up too.
Why don't you give an example of the house?
Oh, yeah.
This would fit into?
You're talking about the one on church. I had to get my house right. So this also came up in a very real example for us that we had to negotiate through as a staff and worked out fine. But if y'all have been downtown lately, there's a new home on Church Street. It's a big white house, and they've got kind of a mother-in-law home in the back that's still detached by the common roof line. So the problem arose that the owner wanted to build a duplicate version of the little tan brick house right next to it, which our Historic Landmark Preservation Committee would have been, yes, absolutely, that matches the neighborhood, it matches kind of our area. But then when you go to planning and zoning, in downtown, you're supposed to have multifamily because you want, in theory, a higher density for your downtown area. So planning and zoning told them no, they could not build that house because it wasn't multifamily, it was just single-family residential. And so we worked with the owners. Thank goodness we knew the property owners and knew the builders, so it worked out well. So we had to come up with some sort of, we kind of mashed these two things together on getting a multifamily home there that also fit the neighborhood around it, but still could kind of classify as that higher use density.
So that's actually two homes?
It is. They have a home in the front, and there's another section in the back, but they are connected by a common roof.
By common roof?
Yes.
One or two, I thought there was two, but maybe just one.
They have a garage.
Yeah, it's kind of a,
It's a single family with a garage with two single units behind
Yeah,
it.
two-
all
two units
one
behind it.
long rectangle.
Yeah, so three altogether.
yeah, and so that one worked out, and we were very lucky. The property owner worked through that with us. And so it worked well, and it was kind of, very,
So they only connect by the roof, is what
Yes.
you're saying?
they do. There's a little space in between it, but it still counts as kind of a multifamily, higher density. So we were lucky the family worked with us, but we'd like to have better policies and procedures that allow us to say with definitively, like, yes, here's what's allowed, rather than one committee saying yes and one committee saying no.
So that's considered in a multifamily,
Yes,
even though they only multi part of the roof that connects them?
yes, and as far as I know, it's only one family living there, but it's, yeah, as far as I know, it's only one family living there, but at the same time, they have potential to have other people in the back. So this kind of transitional area or downtown mixed use plus infill, however you term it, we want something that's clear policies, procedures that blends together the needs and desires of planning and zoning and the needs and desires of our Historic Landmark Preservation Committee because it is in a historic district. So we do talk about that, which I think is great. I also pulled out this specifically for Miles. One thing we talk about in our downtown vision plan under land use is downtown gateways. Whether that's how you enter and like what's perceived a gateway, and then we talk later on about how to call out those gateways in artistic ways, ways that are gonna lead to tourism, better wayfinding, things like that. So a lot of the big topics in here are not gonna be surprises to y'all, because we have talked about them over and over and over, which I think is good. I don't,
Yay!
what, Miles?
Yay!
But yeah, so a lot of this is not out of left field. Nothing should be a big surprise in here where they didn't all of a sudden say build a brand new shopping mall right in the smack dab center of downtown. So there's nothing out of left field. We do talk about gateways and quite a few other things we've come up with. Also in this recommendation, I think this was under tourism. One of the things that got brought up was supporting the arts, doing a downtown business improvement district, which I think we had talked about, that no one was necessarily against new funding sources, even if they are either a tax, an association, stuff like that, but just that a lot of people in Nacogdoches didn't understand them because we haven't used them. So one of the things they talk about is a business improvement district that's on page 94, and gave a little bit more of a description of here's what that actually is, and here's how it would work in Nacogdoches. I still do think there's a little bit more needed, like maybe, see example in XYZ city, or something else concrete we can go look at. So they did mention that. Talk about a percent for art funding, which some cities do, where certain percentages either out of sales tax or local incentives or anything like that goes towards supporting the arts. Yeah, Brittany?
Well, they have some pictures of, like the multi-use, like the house downtown or other, because I think a lot of people don't know what mixed use means or what it could look like, and so I think pictures would help.
Yeah, and I know that's something Laura's brought up, Mario's brought up too, as far as having examples of like what we're aiming for. Because we know what we know, and we know what we commonly do in Nacogdoches, but if you don't travel everywhere, or if you're just not looking at what's going on in different towns, you may not have an idea there's other ways of designing or living out there. So in these, and I think in that one specifically in housing, there's definitely some pages on here of like housing example picture here. So we will have that, they're just not populated in this one. But I'll make sure, and also when y'all are going through and editing, even if you have a question like that, like what kind of pictures are gonna be here? Or I'd love to see a picture of a fourplex, duplex, whatever. If you have wants and needs that are not in here, even if you know that a picture is coming later, still be sure to write that down, because we'll make sure to pass it on. The other thing, some of these things, hopefully y'all don't think it's repetitive, but I want to explain why a few of these things are in several different areas. So on this page, it's page 101, it's the arts and culture section. We talked very, very briefly about Pecan Street and Festival Park. That's something that came up during our design charrette, where we kind of said, hey, what if we flipped Festival Park, like Betty says, so we're not staring at people's backyards during a concert. What if we flipped Festival Park, and what if we shut down Pecan Street and things of that nature? So we talked about that. I don't want y'all to get discouraged because we just did it in one paragraph here, because we have probably 30 different ideas that are laid out like this as far as a graphic, a title, and just like a little paragraph. Some of them are not super fleshed out, but then at the end, a little further down, we have about 7 or 8 pilot projects selected. So those are the ones that y'all have talked about in great detail, that everyone seemed to be the most excited about, that staff was excited about, focus groups, things of that nature. We're very excited about those potential projects. So we have about 7 of those called out. They will be towards the end of your document. So that same Pecan Street Festival Park area here that's talked about one paragraph has a whole page or two where it's much more detail. We'll have the drawings from the design charrette, and have more of a, here's how we do this. And then you also see it again later in the implementation matrix at the very end. So it's a lot of like little idea, fully fleshed out, and then actually how you put that into place as far as funding sources, who's responsible, what a timeline could possibly be. So you'll see some of these ideas in multiple places. That being said, when you're going through these pilot projects, it's things like the Washington Square development we've talked about, activating Commerce Alley, doing Festival Park and Pecan Street, and a few others. If y'all are going through those and think those are terrible pilot projects, we shouldn't do any of those, we should focus on these other 6, then please tell me. If you're looking through here and say, hey, there's 7, these are all great, but I think we missed XYZ project, because we talked about it at whatever focus group or walking tour, and we didn't include it. So these aren't hard and fast, like these are not the pilot projects we're definitely going to do. I think there's 7 good ones. That doesn't mean we're not missing some, or that doesn't mean one shouldn't be swapped out for a different one. So as y'all are going through, let me know if you think these 7 pilot projects are the correct ones.
Was there anything, in here about, the absentee landowners that don't wanna sell their property to somebody that wants to develop it?
There's a little bit in the housing section.
Okay.
And I think we need to beef it up a little bit more, because some of the recommendations that are just kind of in the list is talking about, what's it called, vacant building ordinances, things of that nature.
Yeah, vacant building taxes and stuff.
Yeah, so it talks about that briefly. I don't think we go into enough depth as we could.
Implementation, there might be something there too, like how to, like a lot of those little pilot projects, you have to get the property from somebody who, from what I've heard historically, just doesn't wanna sell it to anybody. You know?
Yeah, and some of those things, as far as the vacant building ordinances, those it helps on the Main Street side when Tori is going to try to write that ordinance, get city council approve it. If we kind of say, look, it's in the downtown plan as a recommendation to have a vacant building ordinance or registration or whatever it may be, it helps us having that document, even if it doesn't go into 3 or 4 pages of how to do it.
Right.
A lot of that stuff, we have access to it on the Texas Main Street side of things, but if we have a document based on public input, that the public wants this, it made it in the document, so then when Main Street goes to put it into place, it's at least a backup for us. So some of those things might not go into 2 or 3 pages of detail, but even the fact that they're in there is going to help tremendously. So yeah, vacant building ordinance is in there. Some cities also do an inspection tax, not tax, an inspection fee on vacant buildings. So if that's something y'all want to see put in here that's not in here, mention that and we'll put that under a recommendation.
What is an inspection fee? Do they have to pay if it doesn't go up to code, or like?
So a lot, and it's different in every city, but a lot of those, if your building has been vacant for 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever that may be, whatever your city has set up, then you are required to have an annual, biannual, once again, whatever that city sets up, inspections by either fire marshal, code enforcement. Are you standing up to talk? Oh, so set up like that. If it's not up to code, then they inform code enforcement, and then there can be different fines, fees, things like that put on there. Is what I've seen in a lot of cities. Doesn't mean that's necessarily 100% what we would do here.
The cities that do that, it's all based on life safety, and so typically it's the fire marshal and the building inspector. And so they're looking to see if the building is secure, if there are any fire hazards, and so they put them on a quarterly basis or whatever that city does. Most of them are on a quarterly basis, and the property owner has to pay for that inspection. So it's a way to, you can't insure, but it's a way to help keep fire from happening in a structure.
And if they, so if we have something like that, is there a fee for them if it's not up to code? Like if doesn't have fire protection in it, or if there's like some sort of hazard, like do they just have to fix it, or like how does that, like what's the encouragement for them to do something about it?
That would all depend on how the city writes the ordinance.
Right.
So literally everybody's different. It could be, I think it was 15, 18 years ago, the city of Corpus was one of the first ones to institute a vacant building ordinance. And theirs was pretty strict. And they required, I mean, it got down to the thickness of plywood that had to be secured over the windows, the type of securing method, it listed the type of screw that had to be put on there. It listed the size of the lettering that had to be put on the front of the building to state that it was a vacant building. I mean, so it depends on how detailed the city council and city staff want to get. So there's not a direct, I can't give you an answer, but the city of Corpus did it to penalize the building owners to get them to do something themselves. I mean, that was the whole point.
Right.
And so the city of Corpus went heavy on fines and requirements so that, you know, if John has a building downtown, he goes, I don't wanna mess with all that stuff. All right, John, here's the fine, you can pay it or sell it. Well, most people sold it. Well, that was what they wanted.
Right.
And so we've been able to accomplish something very similar here through the demolition by neglect ordinance, which isn't heavy on fines. It can end up that way, but we try to work with, you know, Mario, the property owner, and walk him through that. And ultimately, I start off and say, if you don't do these things, you're gonna get a fine every day, and every violation is a separate fine. So Mario could be faced with 10 fines per day until they're abated. Well, we've never had to get to the fine stage because people go, oh, that's a lot of money. And so they sell it.
Okay.
So there's the no fine method and the heavy fine method, and then
Would
there's
it-
everything in between.
Who, I mean, because we're not deciding those ordinances, so, but if we have it in the document that or recommend, or that it's recommended.
It's recommended to do things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay.
So it doesn't say, here's your ordinance.
Right.
It might say, you should look at adopting a vacant building ordinance.
I would like to see a menu of things we can choose from next time we meet. Since we're not any experts about it, we don't want to leave anything out. But it sounds like some of those best practices are pushing for towns to revitalize, because I've been downtown Corpus Christi, and it looks different now than it did 18 years ago.
It is a complete, I grew up there, is the only reason I know.
Yeah.
My dad was a city attorney, so I read the
Wow.
ordinance. But,
So I would like to
it
see some of those options that we can use to help educate and move projects forward.
But also, I agree with you, but also we have to step back and think, our downtown doesn't really have a lot of vacant buildings. Because we live here and we see them, we think, oh my gosh, they're everywhere. Well, if you kind of pull up on a Google map and look, there really aren't many of them. There's 2. We have more than that, but they're currently under renovation and we're gonna be opening. So we have the Story Right building, and then we have, what's the other one that's plywooded? I don't know the name.
The watermark thing.
No. It's on
Johnson's
East-
Feed Store,
Johnson,
Jenkins Feed Store.
Oh, Jenkins Pizza.
but those aren't, oh yeah, sorry, we have 3. Jenkins Feed Store, and then the other one that John Sloan owns that he started to renovate. There's really just those 3.
But the Stoneford parking lot too, I heard he didn't wanna sell, and that would be a.
But those aren't vacant
Those aren't
buildings.
Yeah, I know,
So
maybe we could
getting
add a
into-
vacant parking lot
That's why I'm
thing in
saying,
there.
we wanna look at options to revitalize, which is what
Yeah.
Mario's hinting at, and not focus on vacant building. I mean, that's,
What about the ones on Miller?
They
Very vacant.
they look vacant, they look
There's a
under
difference
you.
between derelict and vacant.
Yeah,
And that's what I was trying to get at, what Perky's
Right.
talking about is, let's not focus too much on just the vacant, because that's a different category than underutilized, and, I mean, there's lots of other things.
they don't look productive.
Right.
Is that the word?
Now, is the Jenkins building empty? Did they start renovating at one time?
No, the Columbia building next to it is not
That's
vacant
Dr. Jackson,
and
the
is,
Columbia building.
and has a use, it's just not open.
Do what?
So yes, the Jenkins Feed Store is vacant
Right.
and can't be used. Columbia building is not vacant, can be used, but it's not open. But from citizen standpoint, they look the same.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Jessica, I didn't mean to take over, but
No, you're fine.
that's kind of, that gets way down in the weeds, and I was trying to make sure we kind of stay up here, that the goal, it sounds like, is to get these buildings to a use.
Usable,
And there's a
productive.
lot of different avenues to get there, and not just vacant buildings, because thanks to a couple of investors here locally with, Dennis White and Kim Crisp, they took two buildings that have been vacant since I've been here for 19 years and are going to be open in the coming months.
So then, let me ask you, for our purposes, do we need to mention that we want mechanisms to increase productivity and usefulness of downtown buildings?
You can, absolutely. We don't have to list every single option, but you can, because like Main Street, for the Texas Main Street on our side, since we are a Main Street city, we have use of a lot of resources. We have a resource library where we can pull out, different ordinances different cities use, incentives they use as well. And so that's kind of up to y'all. We can put wording in there as far as like, we want to use any and all tools to revitalize downtown Nacogdoches. So that way it's not as specific on just hitting on vacant buildings. It's more on, can we give people incentives? Like we have a new Main Street beautification grant to help people make the front of their buildings prettier. And so we have tools like that. So we can put wording depending on what y'all like.
Can
And
that be under a code compliance section? Where would it go?
I might have to monkey with that because some of it is code compliance. If there are windows busted out, then yes, you have to fix them. If it's stuff like your building needs a new paint job, but it's just because it's faded, we can't necessarily force that unless it's, the bricks are crumbling and it's a public issue. And so it could go in multiple places, but we can, if you write that feedback on there, because some of that's also the beauty of having a consultant. It's, here's some feedback, put this where it fits. So we can do that as well. Yep. All right. Okay, so moving on a little bit. So I mentioned earlier we have the implementation strategies as a whole chapter in here. It's broken down into more of a matrix, which the back half of your matrix is a little empty right now, just because once again, we're not to all this stuff yet. We do have phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as far as like our organizational programming, because part of this is, how do we make sure that all of these goals, pilot projects, stuff like that, how do we make sure we're working towards those? And so part of this talks about, do you establish an ongoing group? Maybe it's a few members from CPAC and Dtac at the end of this come together to make an advisory group to make sure the city is working on this. Or it's, do we set up quarterly checks to see if any of our projects and our departments are aligning with this? So that section goes in a little to that. We also talk about, when and where we need to include funding and for what portions, whether it's deep dives into, on the comp plan, maybe it's sub-area plans where we really, really need to study this neighborhood or this corridor. We talk about that, and when the funding goes on, then updating design guidelines, and other things of that nature. It kind of gives us a timeline for moving forward. After this, it gets into the matrix where it says, okay, for pilot project 1, here's the groups that are involved, here's the timeline it needs to go on, here's some of the funding sources, and some other considerations are listed at the end. Once y'all get to that matrix, you'll see what I'm talking about as far as it's somewhat empty right now. Part of that is intentional because if y'all go through here and say all these pilot projects are garbage and you didn't listen to us at all, we want to make sure we didn't go too far down that rabbit hole and figure out prices and budgets and who's responsible and ordinances needed if y'all are going to say these aren't good. I don't think that will happen because I think they're all pretty good projects, but that will be filled in at our next draft. So I know that was a very, very fast, quick and dirty version of this. And I know y'all did not have a chance to read 191 pages, but do y'all have any initial questions or concerns or anything about this draft right now?
I do.
Okay.
Concerning housing, and I know I brought this up with Betty earlier. I think what we name housing matters,
Okay.
and I hope that we can include some more modernized versions of housing best practices.
Okay.
Because when you are, I'm hearing fourplexes
Mhm.
and duplexes, and those sound kind of scary, but industry's not even using those terms anymore.
That's just my terms more than
It's, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's local.
Mhm.
They're flexible housing options.
Mhm.
They're adaptable. They're multiple generation housing. That's what Lennar Homes is calling it in Central Texas. I think really stepping that up, and because before, like I told Betty, you remember a time before housing was just called housing, right? Levittown, 1950, 1,100 square foot homes were just homes.
Mhm.
Now we're calling them student housing and senior housing and putting everybody in a box, and those terms, I think, can get kind of scary. And we need to really modernize our terminology and to reflect that we are making a 20-year plan and call it what it is.
Okay. Absolutely.
I have just one kind of general thing, and maybe I'm getting too much in the weeds, but throughout just flipping through, everything says the historic overlay district.
Mhm.
Last time I checked, there'd be 6 of them.
Yes.
So I think that could cause a heck of a lot of confusion if this is suddenly going to be developing Virginia Avenue. I'm looking at John going, I don't think he wants the same development that we're proposing when they keep saying historic overlay district now.
Okay.
Now, there is the whole issue with the school up there, and there's potential, but I think whether they deal with that at the front and say we're talking about the Stern Huya, we're talking about this or this and not this and that.
Okay.
We have properties out on Post Oak Road. Technically, they're talking about that. So there needs to be some clarification.
Okay. There's also one other thing in here about the historic districts. In one section, we refer to Shawnee Historic
Yeah.
District, and I clarified that already with Keith, saying, because a lot of that came up because Shawnee is a older area, has a lot of history, and I know there's desire to have it be a historic district, but at this point it's not. So I kind of told him, I don't know what the wording needs to look like, but it's not a historic district.
The
It's,
historic neighborhood of the Shawnee Street area,
Yeah.
historic Shawnee Street area, but not historic area, capital.
yes, and that's something I already pointed out, because I'm like, that's gonna confuse people. I know what they're trying to say, and I know what they heard at the focus groups, because that came up a lot, which is great, having Shawnee in there. But I was like, we gotta work on the terminology, because it's not technically a historic district. So if y'all have recommendations on how to word that perky, write that down, and we can come up with a better,
The historic Shawnee neighborhood.
okay,
Historic with a little H.
with a little h.
And a little N,
Okay,
capital SS. Not German,
okay. Got it.
because that's what it is.
I know, because I messed with that wording for a while. I was like, how do I make this sound right? Okay. Any other initial questions, concerns?
When we start looking at projects,
Mhm.
is the political will there? Like I know with Washington Square,
Mm-hmm.
that's owned partly by the school district.
Mm-hmm.
Are we gonna go there in 3-4 years? Are they ready to share or sell?
So specifically on Washington Square, I'll give you just Jessica's opinion. We even talked about this with Keith and our DTJ guys and staff. I think the Washington Square idea that we came up with at the design shred is cool in theory. I think it's one of our more pie in the sky ideas, that it's a lot of, if this happens, then we could do this. If this happens, then we could get there. So I think that one is a cool concept. I think it's a lot harder to do than some of the other ones. So at the same time, I have no problem with it being in here, because I mean, we're kind of shooting for the stars with some of these things. But if y'all feel like that's not a good pilot project to list because maybe we can't get there, then that's okay too. So I think it's a neat concept. I think there's some other things that would be a little easier, and may have more political will behind it. But that's just my personal opinion. And again, this is not a plan for
So,
me.
The simple question is, will I be swimming in an Olympic-sized pool by 2027?
That,
Yeah,
Donate the.
you don't
boys-
have to answer.
donate
yeah,
the
say, I
boys.
don't have a magic ball, but, yeah, Randy?
So, is there a place that we've listed all, because the ones that are in here, but
Mhm.
are there other ones listed somewhere that we can like remember or look at, like,
Yeah, that's where a lot of these come into place. Let me get back to this. These smaller ones.
oh, okay.
So you'll see a lot of those, and they're in several different sections too. They're in arts and culture, there's some in mobility that talk about different areas. So you will see those. If there's a topic or a project you vaguely remember us talking about, but it didn't make it in here, feel free to email me and I can dig through our minutes or focus groups and see where we did talk about it and see if it needs kind of more study on it. But if y'all look through these, like Liberty Hall, one of the things that was kind of mentioned was like, hey, can we make it an improved trailhead or put a coffee shop over there instead, or kind of across from Liberty Hall where the old dry cleaner, Hales dry cleaner. Can we redevelop that area? So we talk about it, I mean, the content's not there right now, but we talked about it a little bit. Didn't get a huge amount of traction. We didn't talk about it in committee as much, so that's not in there as one of our pilot things, but if y'all look at that and say, I really think that might be easier or a better idea than Washington Square as a pilot program, then that's fine too. But y'all flip through here, so if those are in here, feel free to circle it and say, I'd rather see this as one of our pilot projects, or if none of your ideas are in there and you wanna go back to something else, write that in there too.
What is that page number? I can't read.
This is 101. Yeah, and that's just specifically in the arts and cultural one. I think there's 6 different examples in arts and culture. Y'all don't quote me on this, I just finished reading this draft a few days ago too.
When did the pilot project start on page 108?
Yes. Yeah, and there's, I believe, 7 or 8 of those that we called out. And those are the same ones, like I said, I don't think y'all are gonna be surprised. They're the same ones we've talked about in design charrettes, some of the different work we've done in focus groups and committee meetings, so they
Should we
shouldn't be
rank
big.
them? Like, this one is the first one I wanna see done?
You can. We kind of have it in a rank right now as far as what staff thought, and then what we also heard in a few focus groups, like, hey, this is my favorite type thing, and maybe the easiest one to do. And also some of those, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but like the ones that if we did those and found the funding, got them done, it instantly kind of gives you that sense of accomplishment that, hey, we wrote this plan, we did all the public input, we wrote this plan, we did this project, and look, we did it. So some of it's not necessarily low-hanging fruit, but could be those projects that we could hang our hat on that then hopefully leads to more funding, more enthusiasm. So if y'all don't think the order is right, then absolutely, feel free to re-rank them.
I have one more question, because my favorite one is the pecan, the festival park, like, thing. But I know, like, closing off pecan would cause, like, does the city own the space to be able to make that lower road that was talked about? And we do?
We do.
Okay.
And
That was my question. I was like, is that gonna take extra work, or is it like we own that and we can make a road?
yeah, and believe it or not, so for the Festival Park Pecan Street thing, when they mentioned like we could close Pecan Street, like all the city staff were like, cool, that's like the best street they could have picked, because that one's a little bit easier for us to shut down. At the same time, you know, some of these designs may have to be modified a little bit, because I think in DTJ's initial drawing, it showed Pecan Street being closed right at the downtown square. For us, you know, we have City Hall, there's a lot of parking back there.
Right.
So it's like, maybe we close it right after the parking lot. You know, we close it at the bridge type thing. So we may not get 100% of what they drew, but closing Pecan Street at that bridge and making that road all pedestrian, rerouting traffic right there is actually relatively easy compared to some of the other stuff we suggested. And then that lets us access Festival Park, get all the way over to Cox Street and kind of that whole area that the city does own. So yeah, that one, I don't have a whole lot of hesitations about. My fellow coworkers at City Hall are gonna have to get used to, like, then you gotta drive back out, but they'll all be fine.
I mean, just, sorry, go on.
I said that section could turn into a driveway rather than a street,
Mhm.
a driveway for the parking lot.
Mhm.
Because you do need some, because you want it to be a safe walkway from downtown to Festival Park.
Mhm.
So, okay,
Absolutely.
go ahead, Perky, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, personally, I like, you know, I think the pecan park type thing and some of the others. Maybe I just haven't figured out the whole Washington Square thing. I don't get. I don't understand it. I mean, I must be, and I'll try reading this again. But SFA is moving north. I don't know where they think SFA is moving south. It's moving north.
And I think,
You know, And the one thing, and I'm gonna do a word search to find out, I don't see hospital in here anywhere. There is a major block between SFA, they keep saying SFA and Mound Street. There is a major impediment in between there that I haven't seen, but I'm gonna do a word search to see if they actually mention hospital.
Okay. Yeah, and a lot of where the Washington Square idea came from is we were kind of doing big dreaming on maps, you know, had some focus groups, walking tours, and a lot of the idea was if NISD tore down some of the buildings over there, and you have TJR and the old university building still, and if in theory the rest of that land was vacant, it would be cool to have some of those flexible housing options and, you know, have some of our trails go through there and public space, which is, but that requires a lot of, if this building's torn down, if NISD doesn't want the land. So those things are still cool to dream about if we want to keep them in there. I'm not trying to sway anyone's opinions, but at the same time, it may be more attainable to, we want to make Mound Street a corridor. Whether, so we can get SFA kids to us, you know, some of that may include, we need a coffee shop halfway between SFA and downtown. And we need better sidewalks and lightings, and maybe we, you know, we already have the Friends of Historic Nacogdoches statue trail up and down Mound. So maybe some of that Washington Square idea translates more to how do we make it a usable corridor? Because I know a lot of people like to view Mound Street as residential, but really it's more mixed use than anything, because you have SFA, you have a hospital, we have several multifamily homes there where we have those little fourplexes.
I think Mound Street needs its own plan.
Okay.
Because it's got some vacant ugly doctor's office, empty buildings there. It's got a few houses that look like they're gonna be coming down. It's just it's a bit of a mess.
And there's even, in the comp plan document, there are gonna be a few recommendations on neighborhoods that need their own, they're called sub-area plans, where it's basically a neighborhood plan.
I think Mound
Shawnee got mentioned in some of the conversations, Mound Street got mentioned in a few of those conversations, so I have a feeling there will be a recommendation, whether it's in the downtown plan or the comp plan, that says we need to further study this and figure out how to revitalize or work on coding or whatever, or ordinances or whatever it is there. So I have a feeling that one will make it, but at the same time, write that on your feedback as well, because even if recommending a sub-area plan for Mound Street corridor doesn't make it in ours, we can still make sure it makes it in the comp plan.
Not this, is when will the comprehensive plan, like I know this is a draft, presumably this is for us to look at.
Yes.
When will the equivalent comprehensive plan be available for the public to look at and comment on?
So that kind
Or
of,
will that happen?
yes, that will happen. I don't know their exact timeline. Theirs got pushed a little bit because, like I mentioned, that goals recommendations thing, they discussed that at 3 different meetings. And then at their meeting 3 weeks ago, something like that, 2 weeks ago when DTJ was actually in town, they pushed their February meeting back to the end of February so DTJ could work on goals recommendations, things like that. So there will be a comprehensive draft plan. I don't know the exact date. I think it's going to be in March.
You'll send us a link?
Yes, yeah, and the March one, I don't know if that's just for their comp plan committee, but at the same time, we can send that to y'all as well as committee members, because even though you're not on the comp plan committee, you're still doing this NAC together stuff with us. So it might not be available to the public until like in April, but I can send it to y'all before that. Because eventually, and that kind of leads us in, I don't want to skip too far ahead, into kind of some of our next steps. Because, you know, initially we had y'all getting this in March and then tentatively endorsing it, or whatever we want to call it, in April, and then doing public feedback. So we've moved our timeline up a little bit. So right now we're just kind of doing that committee feedback on our plan. Ideally for this first round of edits, and once again, edit this, you are not going to hurt my feelings, I didn't write it. You know, I put some feedback in there. You know, there's certain things I want to see happen in here, but please edit it. Don't feel like you're hurting anybody's feelings. DTJ can take it, they're professionals. So if you want to write every comment on here that you possibly could, please feel free. So for us, I'd like to get that initial feedback from y'all by February 24th. That gives us about a month. I know that's relatively quick, but at the same time, you are going to see a draft again. It's not going to be the last time y'all see this. So I'd like to get your initial feedback by February 24th. That gives me and our project assistant, Tori, about 2.5 weeks to get all this put together, get one gigantic document to send to DTJ, then hopefully by the March meeting, I can't guarantee it, but we should have another draft to look at. That one we won't give you as much time to go through just because you've seen all of it once, and so there will be edits, but it's not going to be a whole new document to you. So our review will be in March. Once y'all are at a place where you kind of say, we are good with this plan, knowing there may be a few edits here and there, but overall the plan is good, then we will take it to kind of a public hearing process. A lot of that will be presenting it to the Planning and Zoning Commission, presenting it to the Main Street Board, having them read it, and then also doing some of that public outreach like we did on the front end of this, where we have a survey, we post it on the website. We'll do some sort of public event like we did, you know, at NISD and Fredonia Hotel. We'll do an event like that where DTJ will help us present this plan, of course, because the general public probably isn't going to read all 191 pages. But present some of the big ideas, maybe the pilot projects, kind of how we got to all these recommendations, and then get their feedback. At the end of all that, which hopefully is April, May, somewhere in there, we then present it to City Council to approve our downtown master plan. At that point, it becomes kind of our guiding document for some of our planning and zoning in the downtown area. It becomes the guiding document for our Main Street program, and then a lot of the stuff we do in our community services division as well. So it kind of becomes our marching orders from there. So that's what we're doing right now. The comp plan is going to follow a similar process. I don't know their timeline though, just because they did discuss some of the stuff more in depth. Their document is much bigger and much broader topics. So they're gonna do the same process. I just don't know their exact timeline. Because ideally, if all their feedback gets compiled in that goals and recommendations and they're good with it, then they will start moving at kind of the same pace we are. If they get those goals, recommendations, and strategies back and decide they still have a lot of edits, a lot of concerns, then they will slow down a little bit. Our plan is to keep us on schedule unless y'all tell me otherwise that we need more time, we don't like it, then we listen to our committee.
How will we handle, when we share this the first time with Kurt, how will we handle their feedback?
So as far as like, how do we get their feedback, or if they,
I know how we'll get it.
yeah, we'll get it from Facebook and Angry.
Handle their feedback.
So a lot of that, you know, we'll get their feedback in a million different ways. And then as far as handling it, a lot of it is leaning on, here's how we did that public outreach. We're gonna have that engagement document. We talk about how many people we talked to in focus groups, man on the street events, meeting in a box, surveys, and so we got a lot of public input. We're also going to be plugging into the people that came to our focus groups, that did the interviews, kind of tell them, here's the document we created based on your stuff. What do y'all think? If you love it, please kind of champion it for us a little bit. We don't necessarily want to, we do want to sell it, but we also don't want to sell it. I don't want to cram it down people's throats, but at the same time, we did a lot of due diligence and did a lot of hard work and a lot of designing that I think y'all should be proud of. I'm proud of even this draft version. It's not done yet, but I'm proud of what we have so far. So we want people to champion this. Then it's also up to our Planning and Zoning Commission, Main Street Department to kind of tell people, here's what's in here, and also kind of give everything with a grain of salt that we know you're not going to love everything, and that's okay. Hopefully they'll find 1 or 2 things or 12 or 100 things they like in here, but we know not everybody's gonna like everything, and that's okay. Unless every single person in the general public says all of this is garbage, we'll keep moving forward. At the same time, we can take some edits in there. If we present this to 4,000 people and they all say, actually, pilot project number 6 should be the first one, we all wanna see it, then that can be switched around. But we're gonna do what we can to make sure they understand how we got here, who we heard from, and why we kind of came up with this stuff. And then we're all gonna not take it too personally when, when people don't like it and are mean to us. But I don't think they will be. I think this is a good plan. I think y'all have done so much work, so I'm excited that we're getting closer.
Well, I didn't ask that thinking there would be that many negatives, but.
And I don't think there will, really.
But I just wondered how we could handle, their comments about that.
Yeah, and what we tend to see is, you know, I know up front with this whole NAC Together process and project, there was a lot of fear, hesitation, concern. I think once you present here's like the 100 really cool things we came up with, I think people will get excited. So I don't anticipate there being a flood of negative things. I think most people will look through it and say, hey, this is pretty cool. I think there will still be some concerns about funding. How do we make sure it's actually done? And so then a lot of that goes on city staff later on with the education and showing the public that we came up with this document, we're using it, here's how we're using it, here's how we're going after grants or making partnerships, here's how our departments are working on it. So a lot of that falls back to the city to make sure that we do have that trust that we got all excited about these 10 cool ideas and we're going to do them. So a lot of that falls back on us to do.
You guys, I just want, last night at the city council meeting, Kim Crisp got up to talk about doing the restaurant and the apartments upstairs. And he had done a lot of math, and he pointed out that that building's been empty for, you were there, it's been empty for 30 years. And if it had, and the city's given him some money now through this fire suppression stuff to help him fix this up. And if we had done that 30 years ago, I mean, all the hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax money and other fees and things that we would have, that we lost by not doing this.
Well, it was the owner, not him. Right.
Yeah,
Previous owner.
The previous owner that wouldn't sell it, right? Or did
Well, I
people
think-
try to buy it and they wouldn't sell, he wouldn't sell it?
I
Yeah.
think his story could be told to a lot of people would be interested. I thought his presentation.
The way he
was
presented
excellent
it
last night.
was a real eye-opener of what's possible and what we're missing,
And
what
it
we
was
haven't
very
done.
basic of what we're gonna reap from that building, I thought.
And it addresses a lot, I'm sorry, the people are always, a lot of people are very fearful about, we can't afford it, we can't afford it, we can't afford it. But I think that putting that view front and center just stops us from ever doing anything, going anywhere, and we lose out.
We're leaving money on the table by not
Yeah.
moving forward.
I'm sorry, Brandy, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, that's a perfect example of not having the correct coding and zoning enforcements to keep
Right.
owners from wanting to sell because it's too expensive to not,
To not sell,
to
yeah.
not, so.
Yeah, and I think now we have a lot of tools at our disposal, which we didn't have years and years ago. You know, we have that demo by neglect ordinance, which works. We've seen it work in Nacogdoches quite a few times. We have our historic restoration grants, which Kim Crisp also got grants for that, to do the outside of his building. So we've given him a combination of monies, which I think is great for a project like that. You know, we have our smaller Main Street beautification grant that some of our smaller businesses are using. And so I think then also we need some of those ordinances, because, you know, it's kind of carrot and stick type thing. But I think we have a lot more tools at our disposal that we're being allowed to use, and, you know, incentives we can offer, because I think it kind of goes hand in hand. You know, we want those ordinances, but we also want to be able to help them out. I don't want to fine people to death. I want to fine them if they don't take us up on our very generous offer of giving them funding to do some of these things. So I think we have a lot more tools. And I think this will also help as well if we are trying to either create new incentives or use new tools or find new pathways. Having a document that says we want to revitalize downtown or we want to do X, Y, and Z, this definitely helps us on that. So do y'all have any more questions, concerns? I have on here our next meetings. Keep in mind this March 15th one, and I will send you several reminders, is not at our normal time. Our normal time is smack dab in the middle of NISD's and SFA's spring break, so we lose everybody. So keep in mind that is March 15th instead of like the 8th or 7th. Or, yes, it is still a Wednesday. Yeah, it's the third Wednesday instead of the second Wednesday.
Okay.
So we just moved it back a week. And then we have on here April 12th. It's not our final meeting, but I have that on there because then after that, we may start some more of those public outreach events. So maybe instead of having a monthly meeting, unless we need to do more edits to this document, so kind of from here on out, we're a little bit more flexible. But April 12th we'll meet, and then after that, we may do more public outreach, and then another meeting if y'all need to go over this again or have more edits.
Well, I know you don't want me to ask this question, but I have to anyway. What is the stat? We know where we are, and we know where the comprehensive plan for town is. Where are we on the I-69 plan?
So that one is kind of tied in with the comprehensive plan because a lot of it has to do with land use, zoning, things of that nature. So they are writing that right now. And when the comp plan draft comes out, it will have the I-69 corridor plan in there with it. Yes.
Okay.
Can we have one of our public meetings at Zion Hill?
Depends on when it is.
Dear.
So, yeah, so Zion Hill, the only problem right now,
Can we have one of our public meetings at Zion Hill?
so the only thing we're waiting on,
News in there first.
yeah, because the only thing we're waiting on that right now is an elevator.
Okay.
So once the elevator gets in and we have, everybody knock on wood, it should be shipped on Friday. We're gonna say it until,
Think it would ship this
it should be shipped on Friday, but they've also told us that before, but I'm more confident this time. Of course, once it's shipped, it has to get to the facility. They do a little bit of electrical work there, and then they bring it to site, and it takes about a week to get all of it installed, because it's a lot of,
You know, we had to wait on Otis to come here to put our elevator in at OUB.
yes, it takes,
Should be finished next week. I had an email today.
well, I hope y'all's gets done, but so that, yeah, so that's our only thing we're waiting on. So if there is an elevator in there, if the building's open to the public, then yes, we could absolutely have one of these public meetings there. I can't promise y'all because that elevator, our initial delivery date was Halloween of last year.
Oh,
There, every time I get an email, it kills me a tiny bit.
At the OUB? Oh, that's so cool, I did not know that.
they just
I know.
recently got the funding.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah, so y'all are moving faster than we are, but
I'm gonna do it.
I don't know if this is like a gold-plated elevator that's specialty. I don't think I ordered that, but I feel like that's what I must be getting. So yes, if our elevator is in and we can open it, absolutely. If it's not,
Otis installation, did it come from Otis that lived?
Don't think so.
No, it didn't, but this isn't an elevator. It's actually, this is not an elevator.
It's a lift.
It's a lift, so it's a different company.
It's not Otis then.
No.
See, the Otis men we're dealing with are union, and that's new to Nacogdoches, you know. Like it was real cold one day and they didn't wanna work, you know.
Goodness. Well, all right, well, that's all I have for y'all right now. Just have those couple dates. I will send you a reminder about a week before from when I need your feedback. Just because it is gonna take us quite a bit of time to put all of y'all's feedback into one document.
Just written it in this, you'll take it.
Yes, so y'all can either create your own set of notes, Word document, email it to me, or if you wanna just write it in here, make notes, tabs, whatever, you can bring it to me. I'll put your name on the front of it, and then once we get all your feedback, I'll give it back to y'all if you'd like it. If you don't want it back, I'll keep it.
What's that date?
February 24th. It's that one that's bolded right there. February 24th is when I would like y'all's feedback on this. Oh, is it? Well, happy birthday in advance.
Don't forget that for old people.
But yeah, so I'd like that back, and again, you know, put it in your own Word document, email it to me, whatever you want, or write it here, and we will get all of it together. So, Miles, are you still there? Do you want to close us out?
I am still here, and you do such a good job at going through that I'm probably fired, and I'm grateful for that.
No.
But it is exciting to see that many of the things that we've talked about, I said this last time, the consultants obviously do listen to us. They probably need to listen to us a little bit more. And we've got some feedback, and that's what the chance to take the draft home and take your time and go through it is all about. But you know, I vote not to even shy away from some of those big things, because remember this last time we did this was in 1973. I hope it doesn't take that long to do it again, but if it does, I'd kind of like to have those things out there still so that people can see kind of a future vision of what the downtown section can look like. So I appreciate everybody coming. I wish I could have been there physically. I hate that y'all are in the dark because all I see is glowing white nameplates on the table. But we'll see you next month. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Miles.